Joachim Trier, great to see you. Welcome to FYC at Contenders in Focus Live.
Thank you.
We live in a time of alternative facts and artificial intelligence and deep fakes where I think a lot of people don't know what's real anymore. And I think in an odd way, it changes the role that fiction plays, because I think that fiction can expose truths that maybe reality can't. And I'm wondering if you have seen maybe your role as a narrative storyteller change, because the truths we take away from make-believe stories might now be more important than the truths we take away from real life, because they may not be true at all.
What a wonderful place to start. I think you're onto something very important in our time. In the film, we tell the story of a family, and it's about reconciliation. But outside of the family home, there are actually two buildings in Oslo that we filmed at. One is the National Theatre, where Ibsen did his plays. It's the realm of fiction. And the other place is the National Archive, where the other sister that doesn't work in theater or arts, she's an historian. She does research about the family history in the Second World War that affected them, it turns out, quite to a large degree, as the story exposes. These are the two parts of the brain, isn't it? It's the two places we go to understand ourselves. The kind of mirroring of the artistic realm and the facts. And they both need to be at play to create a democracy. So I find that kind of interesting, that you can see who lived and died in the 1600s at the National Archive. But you can also see what people thought and felt in terms of their fictionalization at that time.
This movie opens with an actor who is having a panic attack about going on stage. And it feels like I know what the screenwriting or writing equivalent of that is. It's called writer's block.
Yeah.
Is there a director's equivalent where you're not quite ready or something is stopping you from doing the thing that you know you have to do next?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I have to be very frank and say that I'm always excited and nervous when going on set every morning. I've been doing this for 20 years, but still there is that adrenaline. There's the kick of what will happen today. Will the things occur that we need, in terms of the performers and all that. I think I see the scene where Nora, the main character, is panicking and having stage fright more as a metaphor of, to be drawn to going on stage as if it's her only purpose in life, yet being so scared of it. And that ambivalence, I think, is very much what life is about. You're both approaching and avoiding things.
One of the things that I was struck by about this film is the idea of emotional courage, not only for people to honor and share their own feelings, but for others to receive those feelings without judgment. Do you see that as an evolution in your storytelling, a natural progression of where your filmmaking has led? Because it also feels like something you've always been interested in. It feels rather explicit in this film.
I think I came at it from the perspective of wanting to talk about family and transference, all the things we don't have a language for. That happens in all families, And then seeing how these creative people are working in that realm in their art. So, for example, Gustav Borg, Stellan Skarsgård's character, is terribly clumsy in his social language, so to speak, in his way of being with his daughters. But we realize the torment of his childhood. We learn about the character after a while in the film, but we also see that creatively he is able to express emotions in a very subtle and delicate way. So I find that paradox with people interesting.
Ni två är ju det bästa som har hänt mig.
Bästa som har skjedd deg? Skulle vært der litt mer, da?
Här i familjen är alla arga på pappa. Ni två blir ju så bra. Något måste jag ha gjort rätt, va?
Hvordan vet du det? Du kjenner oss jo ikke sånn egentlig, da.
Slutt å overdrive, da.
Overdriver?
Ja.
Jag vet att det har varit svårt för dig. Jag känner igen mig i det. Men du är så jävla arg. Det är inte så lätt att älska någon som har så mycket ilska i sig. Va? Du vill inte vara ensam för alltid.
All of the performances in this film are extraordinary, but I want to focus for just a minute on Elle Fanning.
Yes.
Because she has to do this incredibly hard thing. Her character has to be not good or not perfect in the role, and she has to know that she is not, but we have to believe that she is good and could be good in the role, and as an actor is playing that part as well. The math of this part is incredibly complicated. So how do you, as a director, work with her to get all of those things out of one performance? Because it really is a high wire act.
No, thank you for saying that. I agree. I think Elle is fantastic. And I think the subtlety and nuanced difference that you're describing between performing as a performer in the film and then also those real emotional scenes when you see her character being much more vulnerable. And I think that the differences between those layers in the story is interesting. I guess we talk about it and she's just a really good actor, and I try to create a safe space where she can explore variations. So I think I encourage my actors to not do one version but explore it a bit, and my job is to try to create the space and time for that. So Elle came with all this experience. You know, we've kind of seen her grow up in movies, and she has the experience of a much senior actor, still being very young. So I think this role, she was able to comment in her performance on what it is to be a performer.
But also the performer is conditioned to believe that he, she, or they is exceptional, because if you have any self-doubt, you're not going to succeed. So for an actor as a character to doubt, in this instance, her own ability is an extraordinary leap, because there's such a self-confidence. There's almost a con game that actors play with themselves to believe in them and in themselves in extraordinary ways that there are not very many people in real life who could do what she does and say, maybe I'm not the right person for this.
Yeah, I think without revealing everything to the people who haven't seen it, I agree there's an integrity to her character. And I think that's something I spoke to Elle about at length, was not to make her character just a comedic aspect of the story, the star that comes to Europe and sort of it doesn't quite work out, but more some pivotal character that actually is the catalyst for this whole story.
One of the more heart-wrenching parts of this film is a scene with Michael. He's played by Lars Berenger. And so I have a couple of questions about that. First, the scene seemed to be the first time where Gustav starts to realize that he too is aging. Until then, he's kind of lived in this kind of fantasy world of middle-agedness. But here, he has a contemporary who is, well, old. And he has to confront both Michael's age and his own. Can you talk about what went into writing that scene?
I think I love that scene. And my wonderful cinematographer and dear friend, Casper Tuxen, as we were shooting it, he looked over at me and said, one day it'll be us. And I said, don't think about that. Don't, you know, I'm a third generation filmmaker. My grandfather was a film director in Norway, and both my parents were in films in technical capacities. So I've seen the business. I've seen people getting thrown off the carousel. I'm genuinely grateful for being allowed to continue to make films for now, touch wood, you know. So of course we all think about these things. But beyond that, again, I'm not trying to make a film only for film people. I'm trying to talk about mortality, the limitations of time, and this is a story about reconciliation. So from one point of view, a father is realizing just what you spoke about, that this is not, you know, maybe he won't get to make another film. And the daughters are also realizing that this is their chance to finally, in this chapter, the final chapter of their relationship to their father, kind of have to accept or not accept what they got and didn't get, you know? And that's at the core of this, I think.
Did this film teach you something about your own relationship to memory? Because I think there are three different ways we remember the past. It's like what we remember, what we have through nostalgia, and then what we read, outside documents or other people's recollections. And sometimes the three are very different. And sometimes what we remember, and I think this is something you're exploring, isn't actually what happened. And that we fool ourselves, I don't know, into thinking that the story that we want to hear or the story that we don't want to hear. But did you start thinking about your own relationship to memory and storytelling? Because so much of this is about that idea.
No, completely. I love that question. I think you're already making an interesting statement about how the subjective negotiations between people about what happened, who are we in a family, is very complex, and that's what we're exploring here. And of course, memory is something I've been interested in since the beginning of making films as a kid, because I realized I could show people something from the past by filming it. But then again, that takes on a complete different fictional aspect, so it's not the thing you filmed. And And all of that comes into play as a metaphor for how we perceive the sense of us, or as individuals and as family. And the interesting thing here was to talk also about the family home and try to make that a character. There's a whole section at the beginning of the film of the house looking back at the family through the 20th century, and how quick time goes for a house. Human life, they appear and they pass away. Maybe they get married and get some kids along the way. You know, so I thought that idea of the ambivalence of the memory of the house, the beauty of moving on sometimes, but also the responsibility to remember. In a family that I come from, I felt that the sense of historical weight, both in my Danish family who has Jewish ancestry, and also my Norwegian who had this experience with my grandfather during the war. Like the burden of wanting to convey that story and remember, yet also moving on with an optimism towards my children. I think, I don't know, I think that's being 50, you know, that's in the middle of life, and a lot of that I've tried to deal with in this film somehow.
This might be an odd question, but if you could place a small, almost invisible object somewhere in this film that represented a true sentimental value for you, do you know what it would be and where it would be hidden?
I think there's a lot of artworks from my family. I come from a family background of sculptors and painters, and I can't draw for the life of me. So there's smuggled little things in there as homages to the past, you know. And but I'll tell you what was a funny moment. Opening the film at Cannes, you were put in the middle of this audience of over 2,000 people, and you're given like the best seat in the house, and they actually give you a ticket for that seat. And I looked down at it, and it says Sentimental Value. And I know that ticket is going to go on my wall. That's the ultimate meta object in my life.
I want to ask you about silence, because it's something you're also very interested in as a filmmaker, to not have every moment filled with dialogue or score. Can you talk about, is that something that you write into your screenplays? Is it something you find in editorial? Because I think the audience, in a way, kind of wants to fill the silence, and sometimes they end up filling it with their own thoughts or imagine what a character might say. Can you talk about the role that plays in your filmmaking?
Yeah, thank you for asking about sound. My father is a sound designer and sound recordist, so I grew up on set thinking a lot as a child about what sound meant and how tricky it was when an airplane passed by. I think that silences can be the most powerful thing in movies, and there's a virtue to that where there are moments to lead and inspire audiences for emotions outside of the images, of course, which should carry the main emotion, the actors and the image. But then there are moments when you really need to leave space for interpretation and involvement. And I think the best experience I've had with this film has been about those climactic scenes towards the end where things are actually really, the characters are doing a great job. It's very present, the sisters and the father, but also that it's silent and you're sitting there with a lot of people and it seems like people are engaged in that silence. That's my hope, at least, you know.
There's also a moment, without giving anything away, toward the end of the film where the audience recognizes what's happening. And some people, they figure it out earlier and some they figure it out later. But I saw the film and there was a gasp when a group of people figured out what was happening in a scene. That must be incredibly pleasing to you, to hear an audience react when there's very little sound in the picture to what's going on screen. I think you know what scene
I
I'm
love
talking
it.
about.
I know exactly. And to be quite frank, I mean, I have a lot of test screenings for my own sake to try to figure out how are people interpreting, so that I can keep it open. And that I knew, with having had several hundred people watch the film before we opened it, that there was a discrepancy in the interpretation, but that both, I believe, is valuable. It doesn't matter whether you understand it or not, what you're talking about. So that's the clue. You don't need to be, how should I say, not everything needs to make the same sense for everyone.
When you've made a film that's well received, you end up doing a lot of things like this conversation. You're here and there, you're meeting a lot of other filmmakers. Would you say that you've ended up meeting people who you've never thought you would run into? Do you take anything away from those conversations? Do you have, your award spirit animal that you're clutching onto wherever you go? Somebody who's become your go-to friend?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting this year. I'm a big admirer of Paul Thomas Anderson. I think his new film is a masterpiece. and he's my friend, and we swapped DCPs before our film was really seen publicly. So Chloe Zhao, Ryan Coogler, I met at Sundance Lab when I was an advisor there. And it's ironic now, that I was advising them. They are both masterful directors. So many people that I encounter now are actually people that I feel that I cinematically kind of grew up with a bit, like we were generationally connected. I love that. I come from a small country in Norway. I went to film school in London. I always yearned to have a connection outside my country and to meet people from around the world. So I think to be on the road a bit with a film is a joy, actually. And I'm in great admiration of many of my colleagues this year.
When you're making a film, you don't know how it's going to turn out, generally, or do you? Do you know that this film, do you know that any film is going to be received the way it's going to be received? Or is it always just you're throwing a dart and hoping? Or do you know in your gut sometimes that something is working on a different level?
I know in my gut what I'm yearning for, and I keep my eye on the ball, which is the actors. And through the actors, I gain faith every day, and I love what they do. And then I'm left with that responsibility of handling all that in the edit. And then I climbed that hill with a great editor, Olivier Bouguet-Coutet, who I've actually worked with since film school, all my 6 features. He's a dear, dear friend and collaborator. So I get through it with the support of a great gang, But no, of course you don't know. And you're just hoping and wishing that what you want to talk about works out.
Let me ask this last question. I think any artist says that he, she, or they is changed as an artist by making a movie. Do you think you were changed as a person in making Sentimental Value? Did it change anything about you and about the way you see the world and the way you want to tell stories?
I think every film changes you and drives you to the next. And I don't know what my next is right now. I have a couple of things I'm working on in my head. So yes, I'm sure it did. And it's not a simple catharsis where, I solved that problem, but it's more also cinematically, formically, in terms of form. I've filmed since I was a kid. And I feel that every time I shoot something, I went, I love that lens set. I love this way of moving the camera. Something keeps developing. I feel that one film leads to the next. And as long as I'm allowed to continue, I'm really grateful. And I'm not taking it lightly.
Joachim, thanks so much.
Thank you so much.